Welcome to the Mass Youth Soccer Final Score podcast, assisting the development of players, coaches, referees, and administrators, one episode at a time. Now here's your host, Marcus Cole.
Welcome to the podcast. Excited to welcome Corey Dawkins, lead athletic trainer, Division of Sports Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. Corey, welcome to the podcast.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you being here. We have a great topic on tap. We are now into the spring season. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll stay. And then, of course, right around the corner is going to be summer. And we're going to be talking about protection of your skin for both our players, our referees, our coaches, and even for our spectators that are going out and watching a lot of these matches during this time of year. So let's go ahead and jump right in, Corey. What are some of the primary risks of sun exposure for players during the spring and summer seasons?
Yeah, so traditionally, at least in the public, it's thought about just preventing sunburns and it's all about preventing sunburns. But, the more we learn, it's, sun exposure increases the risk of a lot of negative effects on the skin and the general health. It's not just protecting people from sunburns. Obviously the thing we worry about the most is increasing risk of skin cancers. But there's also other risks, precancerous growth, non-cancerous skin growth that can result from, the sun exposure. Also, even things like cosmetic skin color changes, liver spots, even premature aging with wrinkles, are all associated risks that you can get without even getting a sunburn. And lastly, as an athletic trainer, I've had, secondary risks that I've seen where players have gotten sunburns, and it's so painful that they've had to miss playing time because of their sunburns.
Wow, that's crazy to miss out on that because of that.
Mm-hmm.
What are some practical strategies that you'd be able to provide to our players, coaches, and even referees on how to protect their skin from the sun while out on the soccer field?
Generally want to apply a broad spectrum, water resistant sunscreen with an SPF of at least 30 to all the exposed skin, including, the rims of the ears, the back of the neck. Those are typically the areas that, get sunburn. If players have, or anybody has their head shaved, or if their hair is, very short like myself, then, we also have to apply sunscreen to the top of our heads as well. It should be done about 20 to 30 minutes prior to the start of going out in the sun to really give it time to work. And it should be reapplied every 2 hours, especially when there's a lot of excessive sweating that players have during these summer months. Also, for players, but in particular coaches and spectators and refs, wearing some protective clothing as well. Longer sleeve rash guards can be very helpful. Hats can certainly be helpful as well in order to decrease the risk of the sun exposure to their skin.
I know anytime I get out in the sun for an entire day, I get my very wide brimmed hat out because I learned the hard way being out on the soccer field all day. I would always get burnt on the back of my neck.
Yes.
So
yes.
having that big brimmed hat, my kids hate it because they think I look goofy. But I'm telling you, it prevents me from having some pain down the road when getting that kind of sunburn on the back of your neck.
It can really do wonders for us on the sidelines and when we're just standing in one position while the players are, excelling at what they do.
Now, I know you mentioned about SPF 30. Are there any specific types of sunscreen? I mean, there's so many choices out there from the low SPFs to the high SPFs. Is there any advice that you can give to us in regards to that? And also to just on top of that, protective clothing, are there different grades of protective clothing out there?
Yeah, so in terms of the sunscreen, I don't have any specific brand recommendations, but it definitely needs to be at least a SPF 30 because the SPF 30 will help block at least about 97% of the harmful UV rays. Versus the lower SPFs will only block maybe 90% or 92 or 3%. So just that extra SPF to having it at least be 30 is very helpful in blocking as much UV radiation as possible. In terms of the clothing, they do make clothing now that has UV protection built into it as well. In particular, it can be for, the very tight compression, the rash guards that can be built in. That's something that the players can play in if they feel comfortable. It's a little bit of a balance that must be met during the summer months because obviously, it's a lot harder to wear it, but it does offer the skin protection as well. But for the, referees and everybody on the sidelines, parents included, there are clothing that has UV protection for hats and hats and arms as well. For the spectators and non-players, it is also important to consider eyewear protection because the sun and it does have some risks associated with eye damage over time as well. So I definitely recommend uh, parents and coaches if they can wear some eye protection that has good UV protection as well.
I know that's one thing I can't as I've gotten older. I can't take intense sun anymore. I have to wear sunglasses of sorts, and especially when I'm on turf fields because I get
Yes.
that glare off of the turf, and it makes it feel like I've got this big huge spotlight just right on me on those turf fields.
Yeah, and especially if they're having competitions and tournaments where there's a lot of buildings around, you can have the reflection of the sun rays off the roofs, especially if they're metal roofs. They can really, enhance, certainly the brightness and some of those effects.
What are some of the things that coaches and parents, the type of role that they can play when it comes to making sure that their players, especially the younger players, are adequately protected from the sun during their practices and matches?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that is a possibility would be to limit how much or how much play is going on in between the peak sun hours between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. That's really when the sun is at the strongest and when there's the most risk of skin damage from exposure to the UV radiation. Now, that's obviously not always a possibility with scheduling. That's kind of peak time to also play as as well. Um, so, there are other alternatives that could be done. As we mentioned, making sure there's time to apply sunscreen and giving it a little bit extra time to kind of work in. Uh, that's going to be kind of key number one. Also, depending on the coaches or the parents' comfortability with it, really stressing, hey, if it's going to be a really sunny day, does everybody have their sunscreen on? That's going to be important as well. But we can't forget about hydration either, especially during these summer months once it really gets warmer, because when the body's dehydrated, the skin also loses its resiliency to fight off everything that it does. So giving enough water breaks, making sure people are hydrated ahead of time, and then hydrating afterwards as well to give the body the best chance to fight these things off. Lastly, if there's a possible way to build in some breaks, if you do have to go into the peak sun period where players can rest in the shade, even if it's a couple, big beach umbrellas that are set up to the side or something, just giving them a few minutes to help with the heat regulation as well as, decreasing a little bit of time with the exposure to the sun.
We're talking to Corey Dawkins, lead athletic trainer, Division of Sports Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital. Talk to us about the effects of the sun on a cloudy day, because I've heard people over and over, oh, it's cloudy out. I said, I don't have to worry about sunscreen. It's cloudy. The sun isn't out. What do I have to worry?
You can definitely get sunburns on a cloudy day. One of the worst sunburns I have had myself personally back when I was younger and didn't realize was on a cloudy day because I did not apply sunscreen. So you can, with that, you definitely want to apply sunscreen. It's a little bit of a hidden risk with the clouds because you don't feel the thermal effects of the bright sun on you as much. And so you may not realize it until it's, much later in the day when all of a sudden you have a sunburn and you're like, how did this happen? So I definitely recommend, continuing to use the sunscreen and all the things we've talked about earlier on cloudy days to really decrease the risk of, sun damage and sunburns.
Let me ask you a little bonus question here, something that just popped into my head while we were talking today. Is there a big difference between the lotion sunscreen and the spray sunscreen?
I don't believe that there's a difference in terms of the effectiveness, in terms of the blocking of the UV rays. But I've seen it in my athletes before that sometimes if the spray can be, missed, especially if it's on a slight windy day, they'll miss parts of the body when they're applying it. The lotion will give you a little bit of a feedback that, you have to work it in, especially if it's not more of a clearer lotion. You'll see the whiteness of the lotion that you have to work in, and you make it sure it's on all the parts of the body. Uh, and so because of that, it tends to have a little bit of a thicker, but I don't believe, it doesn't have, it's not like one will block a lot more different types of UV radiation. They will all block the same types of UV radiation. It would just be a little bit easier to ensure you have the proper coverage with the lotion than just the spray, especially on relatively windy days.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because you may be missing parts of the body with that mist, like you said, with if you got some wind or what have you. So that certainly makes a
Yes.
lot of sense.
Yeah. And also, each spray nozzle is not quite built the same. Some have a better spray coverage pattern, some others do not.
As we kind of wrap things up here on the podcast, can you just share any final thoughts that you have for players, coaches, referees, and even parents on developing good sun protection habits that, and these are things that they can carry with them throughout their entire lives to make sure that they're protecting their skin properly?
Yeah, so one of the best things to do is start early and start often. And in the past, I've recommended players put a bag containing the sunscreen inside their cleat. That way, whenever they're going to step on the field, they at least have that little mental reminder like, oh, yes, I need to put this on. So there's no chance of them, not seeing it. And then, just really building in those good practice habits early and often, early in the season as well, because the earlier you get them set in there, the easier it is to build a successful habit long term.
Yeah, that's one thing, getting it in early so that you don't have to suffer through that one painful sunburn that you get early on in the season. And then all of a sudden, you suddenly remember that you need to apply sunscreen and take care of your skin. That's great advice. Corey
Yes.
Dawkins, lead athletic trainer, Division of Sports Medicine, Boston Children's Hospital. Thank you so much for coming on to the show today. We really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you for having me again. It was a really good time.
Thank you for listening to the Mass Youth Soccer Final Score podcast. Join us next time for another informative episode. Copyright 2024. All rights reserved.